first real nice nights of summer to go to an event. Like that's a commitment. So
Yeah.
thank you all.
All right. It's working this time. Good, good, good.
We are almost live stream.
Excellent. All right. Welcome to the launch of Who Needs Gay Bars? We'll find out tonight. So please give a warm welcome to these two guys. I'm going to introduce them fully in a second, but thank you so much, as Hugh said, thank you so much for coming on such a beautiful night. You could be elsewhere. We appreciate that. So my name is Greg Newton. I'm the co-founder of the Bureau, along with my partner, Dominic Jokum. As probably most of you have heard me say a million times, the Bureau is a government agency for a government that does not yet exist. And this is our service, holding this space for queer books and queer culture. We are an all-volunteer organization, so we do have a $10 suggested donation. Give what you can, if you can. You can also give on Venmo at BGSQD. The letters are all around you. But if money is tight and you are hoping to buy a book, you should hold on to your money and buy a book. I'll pass that around, and there's change in there if needed. And if you're not already on our email list and you would like to be, you can sign up for that at the back of the room, and you'll get an email every other Monday about our many upcoming events. And now that it is almost Pride Month Eve, we have a lot coming up, so check out the calendar. And before I introduce our speakers, I wanted to read a land acknowledgement. So the Bureau acknowledges that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape. We encourage you to join the Bureau in signing up to make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community Houses Mannahatta Fund. The Mannahatta Fund, according to its website, is an invitation to all settlers and non-native people who wish to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide that comprise the history of New York City and the United States. And you can find out more at mannahattafund.org. So, Mr. Hugh Ryan, lovely to have you back. It's practically on staff. Hugh Ryan, for those of you who don't know, is a much lauded writer and curator, and most recently the author of the award-winning The Women's House of Detention, A Queer History of a Forgotten Prison. His first book, When Brooklyn Was Queer, also won much recognition. He teaches in the MFA program at Bennington College. And Mr. Gregor Mattson is professor and chair of sociology at Oberlin College. He is the author of The Cultural Politics of European Prostitution Reform. Ooh, sexy. His work has appeared in the Annual Review of Sociology, as well as in Slate, Literary Hub, Belt Magazine, and The Daily Beast. Please give them a warm welcome.
It's always a pleasure to be here. It's like gay bars. Gay bookstores, queer bookstores are one of the spaces that growing up I had some very limited access to, or at least knowledge of existing. There were very few places that I thought I could go and have any kind of queer experiences. And so spaces like this I think are really important to all of us. It's such a relief to know that the beach, I can never quite say it right, BGSQD, the Bureau, thank you, is here at the center. And this is such an honor. Thank you for inviting me to do this tonight. I was saying to Gregor earlier that my work is a lot about incarceration and death and the police, and it's not very fun. It's not very exciting. It's not a like Pride Eve kind of conversation, you know?
I don't know. I do transphobia, racism, misogyny. So
it's true, but you do it with a cocktail.
Well, does that make it go down easier?
Awesome. We can get into that in a little bit. So what's going to happen tonight? I'm going to talk for a quick moment, then Gregor's going to do a reading from the book to give you all a taste of what you're going to get when you buy the book at the end of the event tonight. Then we're going to go into a little bit of a conversation and then really open it up to you all to ask your questions. So as we're going through, please think about them, keep them in your head. If you need to like whip out a pen or your phone, write something down, go for it. The first thing I want everyone to do though before we get into this event, when I read the book, of course, it immediately threw me back to that like first gay bar, that first one, that was like really truly like my home bar, the most important one probably to my development as a queer person, because in the mid 1990s, I was in college at a large school upstate that had very little gay presence, lots of students, but everybody was kind of hidden. But there was a bar, not anywhere near campus, unfortunately. It was about 10 miles away, so you had to get a ride there. And the way that you met most gay people on this campus was spending Friday afternoon going up to anyone who looked like they might possibly just even the tiniest bit gay and be like, hey, are you going to Common Ground later? You don't have a car? Just desperate to get a ride out to the bar. And I met so many people that way and spent every Friday night there for years. And it was a really weird, in some ways, bar. I didn't know that at the time, right? Because I had nothing else to compare it to. It was a really mixed bar, men's, women's, some trans presence, but not so much. Like a lot of the place I was in rural upstate New York, there were not a lot of trans folks. But the bar was welcoming to everyone. It had many different nights. But the weirdest part about it, the thing that I constantly return to, is it had been there for many years, and it had been firebombed in the late 70s by homophobes. So it had moved. And once they moved, the cops started harassing them, and they were constantly shut down over and over again for serving, quote unquote, serving underage people. So they had to develop this system. By the time I was going there, if you were under 21, you had to present additional forms of identification, which they then photocopied and gave like an entry to you in their book, and a special separate ID card called a red card that you had to present every single time you came to prove that you were over 18. And then when you turned 21, they cut the card up and they gave you 2 free drinks. And so people would go there and like celebrate. It was like a really big, act of I don't know, of growing up where we were from. Friends of mine would plan their birthdays to make sure they were able to go to Common Ground and get their free drinks. So that has been like the bar of my heart for many years. So what I want you to do now, before we get into any more of this, close your eyes for a second, think back. Think about the bar that is your bar, whatever that bar is. It could be one you went to once, it could be one you went to 100 times. But when you think about like your bar, what is your bar? Toss out some names. Julius's, yes.
Boiler.
The Boiler Room. We got some good New York City bars. What else? Sugarland. Haven't heard that. All right.
Bonnie and Clyde.
Bonnie and Clyde. Yes.
Don't judge me, but it's Slash.
My friend used to shower professionally.
Everyone's friend used to shout.
So many.
Uncle Charlie.
Uncle Charlie's. Oh my gosh, that's a name I haven't heard in a while. Wow. So many great bars just here in New York, right? And that's just in the memory of those of us sitting here in this room. The amazing thing, well, one of the many amazing things about Gregor's work is that he visited 300, is that right? 300 bars. So there's a lot of memories to share. I'm going to turn it over to Gregor for a moment. He's going to do a little reading, and then we're going to get into a conversation.
Sounds good. Thank you all so much for coming. So if you will permit me, I will read one chapter, which is chapter 36, AIDS Altars in Plain Sight, about the Raven of Anchorage, Alaska. You can't write about gay bars without writing about AIDS. The topic is difficult for me. It is important, it preoccupies me, and it is something I prefer not to think about. No other force than HIV/AIDS has shaped my gay life more, even as through sheer luck, I have remained seronegative. My formative gay years of the early 90s were filled with the mass death and disappearances of many of my elders. Only a couple of my peers were taken from me. But AIDS has driven my fears, at times my self-loathing, and always lurks in the background of my current happinesses. For epidemiologists, gay bars were low-hanging fruit where well-meaning straight researchers could find a high-risk population that was hard to find. But gay bars were much more than vectors of a virus. They were tender places of caring and support. They were the first places where gay men organized in defense of their own health in the face of utter social neglect. They're the places where seroconversion was first disclosed to friends, mouth to ear in the thumping din. Their patios are sites of memorials and repositories of scattered ashes, hallowing their grounds. And gay bars were the place where you scooped up free condoms from fish bowls to cope with the pandemic. Those buckets of condoms in gay bars are so ubiquitous as to pass below notice, but to me, they are little AIDS altars in plain sight. An altar is a site of sacrifice and prayer. An AIDS altar recalls the pandemic's victims, but also offers small latex intercessions for the living. Those buckets of gay bars, the story though, of those buckets is the little known story of an undergraduate researcher at the University of Alaska and one of the 3 gay bars of Alaska in the 1980s. Tammy Jo Honan didn't know that her 1990 undergraduate psychology thesis would go on to be cited by public health professionals for the next 30 plus years. Upon my invitation to an interview about her long ago project, she reported, "My husband put it on the internet and it was described as have a martini and a condom, but that wasn't what I was doing at all," she said. That was the heyday, she said, at least in Alaska, of the AIDS epidemic. So I just thought, what can we do to encourage people to use condoms? Alaska was way behind the East Coast because my brother lived in New York City. Tammy Jo approached 15 bars to see if they would post signs above fish bowls of free condoms. All 3 of Anchorage's gay bars signed on, and she had no hesitation in approaching them. My brother was gay, my sister was gay, I had a lot of gay friends. I didn't feel awkward going to the bars. I just told them what I was doing and what I hoped it would do, and they were on board. But none of the 12 straight bars would participate. As she recalled of the late 80s, it was a pretty closeted place, Anchorage. They just said, no, we don't want any part of that, probably because I told them my goal was to affect the AIDS pandemic. The signs, which went on to be footnotes in the global fight against HIV/AIDS, read, quote, "In the state of Alaska, 38 people have died from AIDS. Many more have tested positive. Condoms can reduce the spread of AIDS." When those signs were present, patrons took 47% more condoms than when they were absent. Her other finding was that all 3 bars volunteered to keep the signs up. Participating in community health promotion was its own reward, a reflection of gay bars' not quite for-profit missions. Of those 3 Anchorage gay bars that played a role in this footnote in AIDS history, only the Raven has survived. When I visited it with my parents last April, it snowed every day, so we found warmth at the horseshoe-shaped bar at happy hour, where regulars gather to watch the 5 o'clock news together, providing running commentary and restaurant recommendations for visitors. Described as ridiculously laid back, the bar features a mascot, Winston the Penguin, who migrates around the bar in changing costumes and accessories. The bar's own move to a new location in the year 2000 gave it the title of northernmost gay bar in the United States, but only by a block because Mad Myrna's is just below it. Founding owner Larry Kaiser passed in 2018, but the Raven continued on under longtime bartenders Roger Segraves and Scott Stroud. Scott had worked there since 2000, while Roger had been at Mad Myrna's around the corner. Patrons had colluded in their romance, carrying love notes scrawled on bar napkins between the 2 when they worked competing shifts. The pair was determined that the bar survived Larry's passing. As Roger noted, this place is gay history. They made the AIDS quilt here for Alaska. And he's not kidding. The bar's crammed display cases and upstairs storage are an archive and museum of Alaskan LGBTQ+ history. The Raven has survived the other pandemic, COVID-19. Roger noted, that gentleman over there was one of the many who said, "This is the only place I will come because you guys are following the rules." When a patron called to tell that he had coronavirus, Scott and Roger could get no advice from public health authorities, so they acted decisively on their own. They shut the bar and together they called everyone in their visitor logs to alert them. As Scott said, "It's our community. These are our friends. They needed to know." This is the kind of community care that was promoted in gay bars since the early days of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. The ubiquitous description, however, of COVID-19 as the pandemic revealed so dramatically the gap between straight people enduring their first and the rest of us for whom this is merely another. The Raven still offers free condoms and a dispenser on the wall through which the corners of condom wrappers poke, easily and discreetly plucked one by one. The pile is reassuringly there, but immeasurably diminished, a modest supply of hope and a silent reminder of loss. Condoms mean less today than they did in my gay youth, in the post-PrEP revolution that I have experienced as the most significant event in my gay lifetime. Sorry, same-sex marriage. Now, for their safer sex strategy, many gay men prefer pills and medical monitoring instead of religious condom use. My attachment to free bar condoms says as much about my age and fear of the side effects of medication as it does about Tammy Jo's long ago thesis. There were many years and a couple tricks for which I only used free condoms from bars to have sex. Free condoms were in my luggage, in my jackets, and soggy at the bottom of the washing machine from unemptied pants pockets. While the gay bar-related public health campaigns of New York City, like Gay Men's Health Crisis, are justly famous, the northernmost gay bar in the United States also played and continues to play its own important work in HIV/AIDS prevention. Tammy Jo didn't know when she started her research that her brother had HIV. By the time she finished her study in 1989, he had died. My brother was the kind of person who didn't want to know bad things until he had to, so he never got tested, even though his partner was positive, she recalled. The continued survival of the Raven is a monument to Tammy's loss, to Larry Kaiser's life's work, and to the loss and the living of so many others. As Tammy recalled, we lost an entire generation of mostly young men. Describing how her professor had mailed her a copy of her study back when it was published, she laughed, "It tickled me at the time, but gosh, that was a long time ago." And to the people describing COVID-19 as the pandemic, HIV/AIDS probably seems a long time ago as well. But it's not to those of us who are still living it. Thank you.
So much is captured in just that one bar, right? Community, history, survival, health, death, loss. And that's just one of the 300 that are covered in this book. So I can think of a lot of answers to this question, but I'm curious for yours. Why? Not who needs gay bars, right? But why this book? Why? What is it that drew you to do this?
So I wrote the book I wanted to read. I didn't want to write a book about gay bars. I wanted to read a book about gay bars, like all the gay bars, like not just little dive bars and not big clubs and not just lesbian bars and not just leather bars. I wanted like, what are these things? And we know they're very diverse and that the book didn't exist. And my favorite gay bar in Cleveland closed. Shout out to A Man's World. And I was really pissed off because the local response was kind of a shrug. And local journalists were like, hooray, we got this new art gallery. We got a vegan dog treat store. We got a cycling studio, a fresh juice bar. And everyone's like, oh, it's so great. And even the gay men in town were like, you know, every bar is a gay bar, said this one guy who I quote mercilessly. And, you know, but the people who were happy were all white, middle class, middle-aged, gay, cisgender gay men. And we who can go anywhere and have the money to make any bar our gay bar for the night, you know, that's really nice. But I thought back to when I was 21 and I could only afford 2 Miller Lights and still have enough money to tip the bartender. Like that was my budget. And so I would ration the whole night unless someone took pity on me and bought me a drink. And when that bar closed, I just was curious. And the only news we would get about gay bar closures that you could read in the media were coming from New York City and Los Angeles. And New York and LA are important, but both cities have a big gay press to report the goings on of the bars. And the answer that was always given was gentrification. And gentrification is a major force in New York and LA, but that really doesn't describe what's going on in Cleveland or in some of the small towns of the interior. And I was curious about the national picture. So then I started to get a little obsessive. And, you know, it would have kept going, but my partner, he didn't make it a choice between the book and him because he's not that tacky, but it was sort of like, I was informed that I was finished, and I wisely took the hint.
Well, let's talk about that though. What was the process? What is it that you were informed you were finished doing?
The thing that was annoying to him was he never knew, are we on a date or are you doing field work? We'd be out and I would be like, it's a date night, it's a date night. But then, you know, you see two drag queens get into an argument and one snatches the wig off another one's head and you have to take notes. And so, you know, it started at the beginning. I used the Damron guides. I don't know if anyone remembers the Damron guide. These were yearly printed guidebooks. They were about yay big. They would fit in the back pocket, except that you couldn't sit in an airline seat because over time they grew to like 4 inches thick. And they started listing just gay men's bars back in 1964. Bob Damron was a traveling salesman and he liked to get laid in every city. So he started collecting these things for himself, but then he realized there was this market for it and it became a company. And they were publishing this guidebook annually up until 2019. So it forms this really untapped resource for LGBTQ plus places. It was just bars, but before long it was cruisy parks, churches, restaurants, cafes, bookstores, like any kind of place that would be welcoming to LGBTQ plus people, particularly in places where we aren't welcome everywhere. These guidebooks became the source of the answer to the question, are gay bars closing? Which was my initial question. And the answer is yes. In the last 21 years, 45% of gay bars have closed. So we've lost about half of them. But what I couldn't answer from the numbers was what was going on. And as I was thinking, I'm like, who has access to the financials? Like, who knows what's going on under the hood of gay bars? And that's the owners. So I thought, I'll interview a few owners. But it turned out just interviewing the owners who I had access to in Ohio wasn't going to tell me about what was going on elsewhere. And so I started running around interviewing owners. And at first it was just when I was on conferences. And then it was, I'll take a road trip. Honey, do you want to go with me? No. So how long? Would you mind if I was away for 6 weeks? Yes. So how long could I be away? A month. Okay, that's 31 days. So I took 2 massive road trips and sort of connected the dots, going to gay bars and interviewing owners, managers, drag queens, DJs, patrons, bartenders, bouncers, barbacks, anyone who would talk to me about it, particularly people who had been in the business for more than 20 years, to talk about what have been the changes in gay bars over that time and how have they been responding to those changes. And once I started, gay bar scenes are really hyper local. It was very hard to draw big trends because I'd be in one bar in Tennessee and the owner would be like, gosh, the old people don't go out anymore. Thank God for the millennials, they're keeping me afloat. And then you'd go 3 hours down the road and they'd be like, thank God for the young or for the old people, because young people don't go out anymore. And like, it was totally contradictory. I'd go to one town and they'd say, oh yeah, gay men and lesbians won't party together. That's why our bar is failing. And then you go 3 hours down the road and it's like, oh yeah, we've always had an all gender bar here. So it turned out I needed breadth. And once I started going, I started really going. And by the end, I'd gone to 39 states. And I don't know how many cities.
Wow. I want to get into the future and the closures and kind of where we're at now of gay bars. But one of the things I think is really great about your book, and one of the reasons why I think a queer person needed to write this, is that even though the title is Who Needs Gay Bars, you actually break that down into like, what are gay bars? And what are the categories that you ended up sort of like isolating as the different kinds?
So I was really using the Damron Guide's own coding system. So they were coding lesbian bars. They had lots of different categories that for what I ended up calling cruisy men's bars. So bars with back rooms, strip clubs, bear bars, leather bars, kink bars. I sort of lumped those together. But in a lot of ways, sometimes these bars don't have a lot in common with each other. My first gay bar didn't serve alcohol. It was an all ages gay nightclub in Portland, Oregon that was for 16 and up only because there was a curfew after 8 p.m. for people younger than 16. So the guy who ran it as a kind of as a charity. It was his life's mission to provide a place for young gay people and their admirers to hang out and meet one another. So, it's an open question, really. Does that count as a gay bar if they're not even serving alcohol? Or what does a small dive bar have in common with what otherwise is a restaurant that just happens to have a lot of gay people in it? And for me, at the end, it was, are these places where queer culture reproduces itself? Are we having shows? Are we having charity benefits? Are we having art exhibitions on the walls? If queer culture is taking place there, at least on a weekly basis, then that was what we were using as our guide, because that seems to be the way that people back in the day were using the Damron Guide.
Here in New York, I don't know if anyone remembers the Big Cup that used to be on 8th Avenue.
Yes.
That was the underage gay cafe that I spent a lot of time at in the 90s.
Every city had a gay cafe. In DC, it was Pop Star.
My favorite was that right outside would be the people handing out the free copies of HX and Next and all the party flyers. So it was like you would find out exactly where to go for the whole week just by that one stop. Because you're right, it's a space that creates culture and shares culture and makes these kind of connections possible. So the reason I wanted to ask you that question first is because from reading the book, I know a little bit of the answers to this, but you've alluded to the fact that gay bars are closed. We've lost 45% in the last 21 years, is that correct? Is it across the board completely equal in cities and in rural places gay bars are closing? Is it men's bars? Is it women's bars? What is the actual sort of trend line? What is happening?
It varies by type of bar. So up until the beginning of the pandemic, the fastest closing types of bars were bars that served women, people of color, and men's kink communities. We just finished doing a gay bar census. You have no idea how enthusiastic undergraduates are when you send out an email saying, do you want to count gay bars for this semester and get paid? And you'd be surprised how many want to spend their days doing that. So we did a gay bar census, and there were some hopeful signs. There was a rebound. So gay bars were added between 21 and 23. Number of lesbian bars nearly doubled during that time. Now there's only 29 about in the entire country, so that's not great, but it's better than the 15 that there were in 2019 and 2021. The biggest bars that have suffered are bars that only serve men. If you are trying to be a gender segregated bar of yesterday, those bars are going away the fastest. Men's kink bars are also going away fastest, and I suspect there's a lot of overlap between bars that only want cisgender men in them and many of the kink communities. Although I profile several kink bars that have become all gender kink spaces and have managed to win along the elders and bring along the young folks and sort of find a middle ground where everyone can party together. All the lesbian bars that I visited are all gender bars. I was maybe too deferential and respectful. I didn't want to impose myself in a place where I wasn't wanted. And it turned out I needn't have bothered. All the lesbian bars had gay male followings. When I was in college, we partied at the lesbian bar. Not even the lesbians in our friend group thought that it was a little stuffy, and you had to have a woman to be admitted. So one time I was late and I was at the bouncer, And she was saying, you know, you can't go in, we don't let in men. And I was like, but my friends are in there. And I was like, I'm gay. And she's like, how would I know that you're gay? And I was like, I'm wearing a vest and my belt matches my shoes. And she wasn't happy, but she let me in. And, you know, and that is not the lesbian bars of today. The lesbian bars really have pioneered how do we welcome trans folks, gender non-binary folks, and straight men, and how do we teach people to be respectful and still have a woman-forward environment that is serving women's causes and gender and non-binary people's causes. So those have been the main trends. The fastest increase has been bars that serve everybody. And those seem to be the bars that are thriving. So I had an interesting conversation with a journalist from a major newspaper in a major US city. And he was like, I don't want to see women when I go to cruisy bars. And I was like, what about the presence of women at cruisy bars bothers you? And he said, I don't like it when they point and giggle and tee-hee and they're not participating. And I was like, well, does it bother you when twinks are in there doing the same thing? Well, yes. And I'm like, well, then why don't we kick out all the people who giggle and tee-hee and have a space for the cruisy, sexy, sultry people of whatever gender. And, you know, that's something that the Jackhammer in Chicago has managed to do. And, you know, I think there is a roadmap for success. This is not an inevitability, but I think some bars need our help as patrons to sort of help bring them along into the new world. I think in a bigger city like New York City, you can afford to have a bar that serves just a niche, but in most parts of the country, you have to appeal to everyone. And it was very striking as I was driving around. I'm a nerd. I would look up the census demographics of the county of every gay bar that I went to, and I was burning up my data points on my phone. And, you know, I'd be in a county where I'm like, oh, this county is 70% Latina, but everyone in here is white. Or I'd be in a city that's half Black, but almost no Black people in the bar. And I think when I see that, I think this is a bar that's in danger because it's not serving the breadth and the depth of our community. So that was one of the trends I saw.
Well, since you brought them up, let's talk about the bachelor party in the room, straight people. You mentioned that person earlier who said every bar is a gay bar now. Is it also true that every gay bar is a straight bar? Now, what is the role, the relationship between straight people and queer space, at least as you saw it through this?
So maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, but in all of the small town gay bars that I was in, straight people have been a part of the bar since the 1980s. And all of the owners who I interviewed, like I was convinced, I went in thinking, this is a forced political compromise, or like this is a desperate grab for cash. Like we can't survive without the straight dollars, so we'll do anything. And it turned out that these owners had decided to stay in their rural counties because they were close to their family members. They liked the people they went to high school with. They liked nature or being in the place where they were raised. And they were like, I wasn't going to have a bar that my sister and her husband would feel uncomfortable going to. So on the one hand, you know, if we're going to use our, you know, if we're going to do what we're not supposed to do and use queer as a policing measure of boundary drawing, you know, it wasn't queer in the sense as there wasn't hardcore porn on the TVs the way that you can get in some big cities. But on the other hand, these are places where city officials were sometimes coming in with friends of friends into these small towns in often red communities. And these were bars where straight people were meeting gay people in parts of the country, perhaps where we need that more than others. So in those parts of the country, straight people have always been a part of gay bars. Another thing that surprised me and probably shouldn't was the number of LGBTQ+ communities who are sustained by the labor and care of straight people. So there were two gay bars in particular that I profiled, Blackstone's in Portland, Maine, and Chumley's of State College, Pennsylvania, that have been managed by straight people for the last 20+ years or whatever. And what I loved about both of them is they were both very modest and said, oh, no, I'm not a member of the LGBTQ community. I just, these are my friends, or I just do this because, I just like to support other people. And I appreciate that they don't say I'm a pillar of the community, but I, as an outsider, am happy to say these were pillars of the community. Like, this was the reason why these cities had Trans Day of Remembrance ceremonies. These are the people for why the local queer film festival had a place to be. And so straight people have always been part of the LGBTQ plus community, whether or not we like it, and whether or not they always take up the appropriate amount of space. But when I started this project back around 2016, the big conversation was the invasion of bachelorette parties. And I have also been to bars where there have been an invasion of people who I didn't really appreciate. But the funny thing is, once you start policing bachelorette parties, the first time that one of these bars did this was they kicked out a lesbian bachelorette party. And in other times, you end up policing the bride is bisexual, and her maid of honor has taken her to a queer place to sort of honor her queerness. So I'm not really interested in drawing the boundaries. I think the lesson I got from one of the gay bar, well, the lesson I got from a bar that is not a gay bar. They are not a gay bar. They have a campy mural of Elizabeth Taylor. The staff wear pink tank tops with Elizabeth Taylor on them. There's rainbow bar mats. It's in Shaw in DC, which is sometimes called the best neighborhood in the city, but it's not a gay bar. Lots of straight people there, but also like there was a twink wearing a Nancy Pelosi midriff cutoff. It's DC, we're political. But I was like, if this is not a gay bar, I sure like it because it was awfully queer. And so rather than engage in the really tired debate about are we post-gay, I mean, I'm not post-gay, and you can pry my gay out of my cold dead hands if all the other bars decide to be post-straight. If they'll give up their straightness, then I'll consider letting go of my gayness. But there are bars that are giving up on their straightness. I mean, one of the things that was interesting that happened in Cleveland, the big gay nightclub that had the drag stage closed. And so it was this little crisis, like what's going to happen to the drag scene? Because there was one bar that sort of was where all the drag was. And drag just exploded all over the city. The straight rock clubs started having drag shows, and they started having sort of glam gore, sort of the Dragula style of drag. The punk club started having punk drag shows. The fancy hotels downtown started having drag brunches. The Mexican restaurant started having a drag show that had nothing to do with Mexico or Latino people. It just was having drag on Friday nights. And drag was everywhere. And queer people were going to these restaurants and places on the days when drag wasn't there. So suddenly places that I had previously experienced as very straight, sort of hetero rock clubs were now actually pretty queer. And so I think these kinds of places also provide a model where you may not find a lover there necessarily, but you'll feel safe there. And queer people like punk always have. Queer people like rock music always have. So the fact that these places now are there for us in many more ways, I think is evidence that we have more choices. Someone was like, what do I want? I was like, I want everything. I'm queer, I want it all. I want choices. And one of those choices is I want gay bars to exist. But I don't want it to exist at the expense of other people. And I want these places to be fun.
I think that's a really good closing note for our part of this conversation. We've only got a few minutes left, but I wanted to open it up to folks in the audience. What are your burning questions about gay bars? Do you need them? Do you have a particular bar that you remember that you want to ask if it's still around, it's covered in the book?
What's the situation internationally? And I think of Montreal, where all of the gay communities have always stayed in the same neighborhood. They just stacked format, or literally multi-story bars with every format in every floor, because it all stayed in one place. What's happening to bars in Canada or Europe or elsewhere?
The question was, what's happening in gay bars internationally? The answer is, I don't know. Like, it's a total punt. Like, it took me 7 years and 20 undergraduate researchers to figure out what was going on in the US. And I have talked to journalists, I'm like, I can tell you how to do it. Like, the Spartacus guide was related to the Damron guide. Someone could stack those Spartacus guides end to end and count how many gay bars were there and how they've shifted over time. And I just got tired.
Your husband didn't want to do any international
Oh my
nights,
God.
is that?
Oh my God.
Are you taking volunteers for an international survey?
Well, you know, Montreal is interesting because the gay neighborhood has stayed consolidated. Finland is interesting because the biggest gay disco is funded by the National Gay Rights Organization, and it receives its fund from the Gamblers Anonymous slot machine fund that the government administers for good causes. Like,
Awesome.
you know, we should have more state-sponsored discos.
Other questions?
Yeah, we'll-
We'll go all the way in the back and we'll go Howard.
I'm wondering if you address the fact that so many queer people end up in 12-step meetings, as I know full well, being in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. Two of the question was, do I address that so many queer people end up in 12-step and recovery programs for addiction? And I do, because one of the major themes of the book is ambivalence, and LGBTQ plus people have been ambivalent about gay bars as long as there have been gay bars. On the one hand, we love them, we find them rites of passage, they're totally escapist from our everyday life. And on the other hand, they are places organized around substance use. They are places that are heavily government regulated, of a people who don't like to be regulated very much, or when we do, we like it consensually. And one of the answers for why there's so few lesbian bars is the women's community organized early on around Sisters in Recovery and meeting around cafes and coffee houses and non-alcohol spaces. And there was a lively scene of non-alcohol, non-club spaces. So yeah, you know, addiction and organizing around substances is one reason to be ambivalent about bars. And yet, you know, I also still like a drink, even though I wish I drank less. And so I get to be ambivalent about myself too.
I was going to say, from the mid '80s to the early '90s, I was the bouncer at the gay bar and at the big disco, the Second Chance, Nectarine Ballroom, and in Ann Arbor.
In Ann Arbor, yeah, I know Necto.
Yeah, now it's Necto. It's been downsizing. It's Necto. My job was when they were going to have gay nights on Tuesdays and Fridays, and the DJ told me, "Oh my God, we can't get the meatheads off the door. We need a gay person at the door." And half of my job was to keep straight people out, was to tell them that it was a gay night, and to keep, you know, that they weren't dress coded. The girls, no, you can't come in with the gang of girls. I was back a couple of years ago and asked them, now it's Necto, and I asked if they still have gay nights. They said, yeah, Monday night is art school, so you know, that's pretty good. So on Tuesdays and Wednesdays is girls, and it's like, there's a big lesbian, you know, Thursday, I guess, is maybe, you know, so, but it's, when you talk about that, it's now all just kind of mixed up that way, so.
Yeah, the comment there was about the big nightclub in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and how now almost every night is a little gay, but there's no gay night in the way that there used to be when one of our audience members was the bouncer. If you have noticed, for younger people these days, gender is more important and more consequential than sexuality. And that was certainly not the way it was when I came out in the 80s or in the 90s. But for the young folks, I think having an all gender space is more important than having a gay space or a lesbian space. And So it doesn't surprise me that Art Beat Night and Art Club Night and, you know,
They still have those names, but yeah.
they still have those names and lots of queer people go there. But, you know, for me, the lowest possible bar to clear is safety. Do we feel safe in this space? And are there going to be security staff who are going to have our back when we need them? But second, it's like, can I have fun in this space? And sometimes the fun is locking eyes with someone for just a second too long to see if they'll look away first. And then you think you should look away and then you don't. And then you next thing you know, you might be making out behind a jukebox. Like that's, you know, one of the other things we want these places to have. And if we can make out at the punk club and still feel safe, then to me, that's a positive thing in the world.
I think it was the Tunnel here in New York in the 90s that had two separate entrances on their gay night. So one entrance you went through if you were queer, and the other one you went through if you were straight. And if you were straight, you got a little wristband, or no, if you were queer, you got the wristband, so you could go into all parts of the club. But if you came in the straight door, you had to only stay in the straight sections. And the door people would, if people tried to get in, they would be like, okay, you can make out. No, make out. I need to leave. And you were like, you had no other thing. You said, because the door people said if you wanted to get in. Different world. That would not fly today. I think we have one more question over here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a native New Yorker. I came out in the late 70s. Let's say I have never heard the expression kink bar. So what is a kink bar?
So in the olden days, they were leather bars,
Okay.
but
Okay, like fetishistic.
fetishistic bars. But many of the younger folks are not into leather the way that the old guard, and of course the old guard debates amongst itself who gets to count as the old guard and should there be an old guard and who gets to draw the boundaries of what counts as old guard. And I, you know, defer those to my elders. But many of these leather bars have had to adapt, that younger folks are into puppy play. I mean, that seems to be the biggest new fetish. We have a new, Cleveland has, you might have seen this in the New York Times last fall, but we have a new, it's a gay bar / pizza restaurant / drag stage / gymnasium / demonstration kitchen / podcast studio / community garden. So it's like a gay neighborhood in 2 buildings, and they have dodgeball. Like, if you want to meet people in Cleveland, you have to go to gay dodgeball, which I don't do, which is why I have no friends. But we went there, my partner and I, we tried to go to the Go-Go Bear event, but they had the smoke machines on so high that you couldn't see 2 feet in front of you. Like it really was bad. So we were like, no one's here. We'll go to the puppy play night. And there were like 350 people in the gym, and their little tails were wagging, and they were all good boys. And, you know, while, you know, the DJ was great and, you know, everyone was having a great time. So we were having a great time. And then suddenly you heard, bye, bye. The fire alarm was going off, and it kept going off because the smoke machines were on, and they kept turning it off. And then the firemen showed up with the hoses, and they were very popular. So there are many ways to do fetish these days. And one way is don't pull the fire alarm just to get them to show up. They're busy people. Leave. Although the gay bar in Gun Barrel City, Texas, led the fundraiser to buy new hoses for the fire department. So Gun Barrel City has gay hoses.
Well, thank you so much, Gregor. This was amazing.
Thank you. Thank you to the Bureau for hosting. The Bureau is a tremendous gift to civilization.
It truly is.
Thank
And
you.
will you stick around and sign books if anyone bought a copy?
Yes, I will stick around for anything.
Thank you to everybody on Zoom.
Yes,
You
thank
can
you.
buy your books and have them shipped to you.
And send me an email and I'll send you a sticker. I'll sign a sticker.
Oh, that is a great offer.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Anyways, thank you so much, all you online